Yeah, and then again, I think for certain class of brainstorming sessions, hope, and conversations, we can choose not to post the lectures online. It just depends when we are really in a phase of discussions. It may be that some people, the discussion can be much more open. So we can decide that later, but we should always have a record of it. So I wanted to start by kind of sharing context around, and I'm not going to show you I will eventually share the slide deck associated with I'll share the slide deck associated with what the team did in the past, but there's a particular video that I will start with.
What do I think of my dad's?
I'm just going to share my screen in a second.
It's clearly some of his best work.
Makeup can be a tool for.
That is not what I'm looking for. And hopefully this is what I am.
You're back now at 8.
Okay, so let me share my screen. So the first story is really from Madagascar. And most of the time we will talk about India because we have more contacts and people in India on this problem, but I'm just going to play this out for a few minutes.
Sheet mica, it's high quality sheet mica brought back from Madagascar, the world's largest exporter. Our investigation took us to an area few outsiders have ever seen to tell a story that has never been told before. The tragic human cost of mining mica. Over the course of nearly a year, 2 NBC investigative producers pored over customs and shipping records, ultimately joining forces with a leading Charles Rights group to document for the first time that some of the world's most vulnerable children work for pennies to help fuel the world's dependence on mica. We've come to Madagascar, off the east coast of Africa, a place known for its physical beauty and its playful lemurs, to investigate a decidedly less picturesque story. The outrageous exploitation of children to fuel the world's dependence on mica. Those holes you see are all narrow, airless mica pits dug deep into the earth. Hello. Nice to meet you. We meet little Morella and her mother, Solange. Solange is 30 years old and has 6 children. They spend their days mining mica and their nights protecting it. And you sleep here, why?
If he left here overnight, people would steal the mica.
Every morning, Solange straps Morella on her back and descends over 50 feet into the pit to dig. She is not alone. In nearly every pit, children are at work. It's 100 degrees outside and even hotter inside the mine.
They work as a family. They started early in the morning.
We've come here with Thangam Pampandi, a lawyer whose work in India with a leading child rights group, Terre des Hommes, helped expose the horrors of children working in the mica mines there. Together, we'll travel more than 400 miles through the poorest part of the country, a place rarely seen by outsiders. A U.S. Department of Labor report estimates 265,000 children are working in Madagascar. Over 10,000 of them in the mica mines. This is the first time anyone has told their story. Today is payday. After 2.5 months of backbreaking work, Joseph, the buyer, arrives. Hello. You have the money?
Oh,
Tell me how many kilos is this?
Around about 6 tons.
6 tons. For 6 tons of mica, the 9 of them will only receive a total of $240, and they'll get about half of it as Joseph deducts the cost of their food. A vicious cycle. It's so precious to the rest of the world, and the people who are actually doing the work get so little of the money. Precious and critical to the aerospace, electronics, and automobile industries, because mica is a natural insulator that won't overheat, even in extreme temperatures. How much is used worldwide? A massive amount. Consider just the automobile industry. By one estimate, every car has at least 15,000 parts that contain mica. How do you feel about the fact that your work is going to generate so much money for somebody else?
They don't have any money, they don't have any choice.
Who controls most of the world's mica? China. Over 90% of the mica mined in Madagascar will end up there. Do you think the Chinese are taking advantage of the people who are doing the hard work?
That's very clear, yes.
That's very clear.
For Solange and her family, this is an endless process of turning rocks into food as best they can. What would you like to have Americans know about the mica in their cars, in the planes they fly in their phones?
People overseas are now going to be able to see with their own eyes the conditions and hear her words. They should be thinking about getting a fairer price because they're suffering.
That suffering extends beyond the mines. At processing centers, tiny children are at work. Turn around, right over here, very young children. Let's go take a look and see if we can talk to some of the kids. So these little children are working here. They split the mica. They try to find mica pieces.
The tiny fingers are good for that.
We notice a mother and 4 children working in the shade of an old truck. So how many hours a day do you do this?
So she works here from 5 to 6 in the afternoon.
5 in the morning
Yeah, 5
until
in the morning
6
and
in the
6 in the
afternoon. Her children work the same hours. The family earns less than $3 per week.
So I'm going to stop there just for a kind of a brief set of kind of getting the statistics in place. And it was important that everybody saw this. I think when the 2 students had brought up, and again, we'll talk about Madagascar a little bit, but the same story plays out in Jharkhand and a couple other places around the world itself. This is the business of small-scale mining. It's not as if large-scale tools and technologies don't exist, but that require an immense amount of capital. And the irony is it's not an object that is in low demand. Like I wouldn't be talking to you without mica in place in every little place of electronics. So it's not as if this is in terms of volumes, it's a significant portion of the volume of the kinds of trade that mica is mined through these small scale mines. We will talk about Peru and gold mining. I see a message from Victor. So I think I'm just preparing these 2 sets of things. But just, I think one thread as a comment is I want to show you a small clip from Jharkhand briefly right after this on mica. Then we'll have a little bit of a discussion on mica, and then we will transition to talking about gold mining in Peru in some sense. And I think hold your thoughts for a minute in terms of, we'll break this down in terms of thinking about what sets of both an emotional reaction that you might have to this, and also transitioning and taking that energy and the passion you might feel for a problem and converting that into, what might actually be a next step that looks like. So, this transition, it's hard and it's important to think about because unless you emotionally care about something, it's very difficult. So journalism and storytelling has a very important aspect in this, unless you've actually seen how sets of products that we use come about. It's very difficult to dedicate your life and your time to it. So we're going to go to Jharkhand now. I just want to show just the idea of how similar the process plays out in a completely different part of the world. Different laws, different rules, but again, a very similar situation.
They are mining mica. We are in northern India, in Jharkhand. one of the poorest regions in the country. Deep in the crevices of this cliff, 20 or so men and women are rummaging through the dirt. They are mining for mica. There are thousands of mines like this spread across the Jharkhand region. They are not run by big corporations. Each person collects these stones for themselves.
So that's around $1 or $2, by the way, just for rupees.
और एक बार बताऊंगा सही बता आपको पता है ये माइका क्या होता है और
नहीं सर नहीं पता है
किसको यूज होता है पता है आपको
नहीं
ये कितनी कीमती हो सकता है
नहीं पता है पता रहता तो
For just over $1, these women are working 8-hour days under a blazing sun.
क्या करेगा गरीब थी घर भी रह तो क्यों रहे पेट में करता है वो खाने में मर जाओ
It's not just adults working in these mines. Further down the valley, we spot a group of children.
So I think the story is very, very similar. The politics is different. This is a longer documentary worth watching. In terms of the context of this, and again, there is a political side to this, there is a technical side to this, and then there is the execution and implementation. There are a few NGOs, and I think just to be very clear, in India, this was declared, once it was identified, there has been kind of a massive curtailment, or at least trying to stop child labor in this industry. There are several other industries in the past where child labor was a big issue, and over the years that has improved in some sense, and mica mining still remains to be one. I think the number from Madagascar are just at a much larger scale. The quality of mica there is very different also, as compared to what you were seeing in small scale. And then in terms of, I think a few of you brought up this notion of where mica is actually used. So I'd mentioned this thread around much of electronics, but there is a second use of very, very small mica, which really comes in the cosmetics industry. So that's another big pressure and a push in the political side, is because all cosmetic products have shreds of mica in it, used as a shine, and so there are different grades of mica associated with it. So before we dive in, I'm just curious. I'll share some numbers in the slide deck, and the video presentation from the last team. Let me dig that out for a second to see, so that you all can see the actual student group that had brought the okay, let me go in projects. I'm trying to remember it. It is a 2020 team. So I want to show you okay, there it is. Hope, I'm looking for the link for this. So I'm on the projects page here. Do you know where the video links are?
Oh, if you just click on the image, then it should bring you to the.
Yeah, it seems like the Mica link is broken, unfortunately. So
Okay, let me grab it for you.
Yeah, see if you know. But anyway, this was one of the and there's a lot of statistics and by the numbers associated with what the team essentially did per se. What was very important about this team also was this idea that some of the members actually grew up in a region very close to Jharkhand itself. So there was a sense of a much deeper understanding of the politics associated with this too. Okay, so while we're looking for that link, maybe I'll open up for certain sets of first reactions. What goes in your mind when you think about this? If you were turning this into an action plan for a project, what would you think about? How would you go about it? What obvious sets of numbers that would you want to calculate first to really understand this? And I think something that's I didn't mention as yet, but I'll bring that up, is there's a very deep link between mining and health that's associated with, these are called silicaceous materials. So when you mine, a very fine dust is produced, like asbestos dust, that goes into the lungs. So the TB numbers, for example, for this Kodora and this region in India, and of course in Madagascar, are through the roof, because mica, when deposits in the lung, so it's not, there is a context to it that has a health factor as compared to, and again, this has been known in coal mining and many other places too. So yeah, maybe first set of reactions, ideas, what comes to mind when you hear a problem like this? And I think I'm just doing this as an exercise for everybody to be on the same page of the breadth of problems that many of you can actually choose. But how would you go about even breaking the problem down? What is the first set of things that you could potentially think about doing to understand the problem? Go ahead, Vaibhav.
Professor, maybe start by identifying the most prominent sources of mica globally, and then find out what percentage of it is produced by uh, large scale mines and using high technology where less manual labor is involved, and then see what's the remaining percentage and how spread out it is.
Yeah, so I think I love that approach, and that would be exactly what you would think about in the context of by the numbers, that you gotta dig in and find numbers associated with this, and especially small scale and large scale. Okay, next we have Yuki.
So if I were to look at this problem, I will also look at what are the possible income source of that particular area to see whether it's possible to actually redirect these miners to other resources so that this will be not a problem.
So that's a very important thread to think about, that maybe the right solution is to not give them the right set of tools, but to be thinking about other economic avenues, primarily because some regions that this is done is declared illegal by the government. So somehow the region itself, or at least from a policy perspective, the idea is that that should not be done. But then that does imply alternative livelihoods. I think one of the important things that does come about, and now again, this is related to the climate, in most of these documentaries, and I'll post these documentaries. I have a collection of around 15, 20 of them, fairly long. You'll actually see that most of these communities used to be farmers before, both in Madagascar and in Jharkhand. And because of drought and no water, and it's very explicit when they explain it and share that, farming has completely led to essentially no income outcomes, leading to this transition. So this is another this is another way of thinking about in terms of what happens in drought regions. People do find alternative means, and sometimes those means are actually exploitative. Next on my screen, I have Urvashi, Vani, and then Rafia.
Yeah, hi. So for this kind of problem, I think the structural approach to problem solving would be much more effective than like an outright ban by the government, which is probably why it hasn't been effective so far. Like one question I would be asking is the economic situation, like the reason child labor is being utilized, the reason there's a lack of jobs available, that if there's an absence of other income sources and livelihoods, that's sort of what contributes to the problem in the first place. And then I like to think of scientific solutions in tandem with economics. So if we had to equip the miners with safer tools, for example, to prevent the fine dust from entering their lungs, if we had to come up with something to replace them altogether, how would that impact their jobs and their income sources? So, and then maybe the climate aspect that you brought up, like how would you rehabilitate the land? How would you restore the ecosystem on a smaller scale to prevent the effects of drought from affecting their lives at a much personal level? Yeah.
Okay, next we have Vani.
Hi. So what I was thinking about is if this is a profession that generations have been involved in, then changing their course might not be the best way to work. However, what came to my mind as the first thing was if we sort of uh, organized the mining, so as to say, as if look at the structures and the different levels of the pipeline from the source to the buyer and see if there is any structural change we can implement that will help us. One of the things being like how in India, cooperatives like village cooperative work, something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, that's an excellent idea because you're referring to, not just the technical sets of changes, but also the organizational changes that are essentially needed. And this is in general, the small scale mining operations and industry as a whole. Many times kids have no other place to be. And then they're there, and then they're being exposed to those environmental hazards. It's just if there is a structural change to it that implies that you're actually thinking about childcare, and then your solution to a problem might be is just creating alternative childcare while adults go for work, that the kids are not being exposed, for example. So I think this is why it's important to understand how multi-pronged some of these problems are. Rafia and then Mrinal.
Oh, at first I want to summarize what everyone said. Like we have seen that in this mica mining thing that we have three different perspectives. One is that social perspective, which actually involves policy, and then the economic perspective, and ultimately the technological perspective, because you cannot bring technology without the socioeconomic analysis. And again, here comes the local solution versus the global solution. So one of my previous experiences on this kind of case was regarding, I tried to solve problems in a sense that I tried to find similarities between seemingly unrelated fields. So I was working on a project that wasn't successful. I want to give that note. It was on preparing a cold chain solution for the fishermen in coastal area of Bangladesh. So these are these people called the Jaldas, like servants of water. And these people's socioeconomic or demographic situation are very similar to this mica mine people. And I don't want to focus very much on the social perspective, but the most important thing before we want to introduce any kind of technology or scientific tools right here is that we have to focus on the economic analysis, especially on the supply chain and the value chain analysis, and how revenue has been taken out of this supply chain every time and created this poverty cycle that they cannot get rid of. Unless we have a greater perspective or greater idea of this value chain and supply chain and how these are tangled together to make this poverty cycle, you do not know the bottlenecks or where you have to press on or to stress on and where you should put your solution rather than just elaborately or just thoroughly going on what's going on there. I think that would be a more systematic approach. It's just based on my experience.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely excellent. And again, this is why I chose a difficult set of a problem to open as a case study, because I don't want this to be you to feel that every time you see a problem, it is not obvious where you should actually introduce an intervention. The economic context of this is such that incredible amount of data is reported. If you really think about just the fashion industry and just trace back, for example, where the value is added in the sets of products. I have to introduce something kind of new into this mix is also there is an entire industry on synthetic mica, which has been trying to replace mica mining in some sense, and that has been growing. There is also a third industry associated with that takes low quality mica and converts it into high quality mica. But then again, very much like the producers of raw materials really get very little economic benefits. It's really the further on chains. So technology does have a role to play in this, and who controls that technology does control some of the fate associated on the economical side. But, I think this is why for most of you who were in the by the numbers class, I want to emphasize why it's so critical that you really analyze the numbers, because we might end up focusing on a completely wrong problem otherwise. Next, we have Mrinal and then Victor, and I have a feeling Victor probably has some of the Peruvian context to this that he'll bring up. Yeah, go ahead, Mrinal.
I was saying that to solve this issue, it's not easy. Like you said, the first thing is we need rehabilitation is really because that's the only sort of the source of income for them, like you said. And due to resource constraints, they're forced to do work in child labor, and the family is supposed to work in mines like this under subhumane conditions. So I think the first target population that we need to help them get out of these conditions is, I think, kids should be the first priority. So like you said, parents mostly take the kids there because they have to feed them. They need to get the money. So if we're able to one thing the governments can do is free education. Like in India, we did midday meal programs that helped kids get kids to the schools so that they were able to get education. At the same time, they were able to get food. So the parents were able to focus on their work. So that's one way that we can, in this case, we can get the kids out of the hazardous conditions, and we can get them somewhere else. And at the same time, ensure that they get educated and rehabilitated. So the next thing is we need to look at the health of these people, the parents and the kids and everyone else working there. So protection should be given. We should be able to give masks if possible, because these silicone particles should be. It can cause, like you said, silicosis and pneumoconiosis is a big issue, especially in India. When it comes to India, we have TB and also like these iron particles. It can reactivate the mycobacterium. So that can increase the risk of TB, latent TB, these risks are increased. So we need masks, protective gear if possible, and sometimes we can use some facilities like use aerosolization to let the dust settle so that they don't inhale these things. We can reduce the risk. And hello.
Yeah, we can hear you, Mrinal. Okay, looks like your video just froze.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'll continue.
No worries. Yeah. No, I think I love the medical perspective on this as well too, because the statistics of TB in these sets of areas is actually very, very high. And then again, if the set of often enough in these types of things, it's multiple exposures. So the pathogen is already there, and then it's opportunistic.
Already there, yeah.
You end up finding an environmental factor that just puts you at a much, much higher risk. Victor, you've been waiting for a while. Go ahead.
Well, actually, I'm not well informed about that topic here in Peru. I mean, we do have illegal mining, no? So that's a problem. But I have realized that most of those cases don't happen in the capital. No? They happen in the surrounding. And one other problem is that the lack of communication about the problems. So our media, the local media, they don't inform us. And that's a problem. They informed us about, about the people who are part of reality shows, no? All those gossip stuff. instead of informing us about the problem of children, of mining, and all that kind of things. No? So I believe also one important thing is to have these stakeholders mapped, no? To understand their role, because everybody, I believe, everybody is responsible in some part of the problem. No? It's not only the public sector, no. So,
No.
but even though they do or do nothing, the public sector, they exist. So it's important to involve them and have them in this stakeholders map from the public sector, the private, the academic sector, because also the universities and the institutes have a role in order to have a solution.
Yeah, I
and
think
the civil society.
this is a very important point. You know, I grew up in India, and only in 2020 did I, for the first time, even understand this an entire framework around the mica mining and the issues with it. So why did it take that long? I actually live not so far from that region that's being talked about. I've passed through many places around there in the past. And it's often, I mean, again, and especially with things like these, far beyond just the public sector, us being aware itself of the problems is step one. So 100% agreed. It's and again, you know, that's one of the, this is why journalism plays a critical role in making sure that when you're choosing sets of problems, you are exploring and looking at and trying, because unless you see reality on the ground, it's, you know, you don't actually, you're not moved to action in any way or form. Next we have
Manu,
Sina
hi,
and Dia.
hi Manu. Can I
Yeah, go
just
ahead, Manal.
my internet froze. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, like in terms of healthcare, something that we can do is, like you said today morning, community health workers are real. They're very good source of implementing health policies. So they can, local community health workers, health extension workers, they can visit these mines. They can ensure that these people are being treated better, that they're taking, like, they're fine in terms of their health. That's something they can ensure.
Yeah, no, I think the health aspect of it is a very immediate one. And again, this is a general problem. Lungs being exposed to pollutants is a much larger issue, and then its connection to infectious diseases is a remarkable axis to be thinking about, because effectively we often think, when we think of infectious diseases, we often think of them just in isolation. And I think the dual, and then suddenly, you know, pulmonary care is not it's not an easy care to deliver. It's, you know, a lot of challenges in pulmonary care end up being far more complex. And so again, you know, it changes the framework around uh, what you might think about the clinical needs of a place like that might actually be. Okay, so just gonna do a quick round of comments, and then I want to briefly show you all and switch to a little bit on the gold mining thread, and then we'll kind of come back to what the assignment for everybody is. Sanjana and Dia.
Yeah, so I just want to bring up a quick point. So a lot of interesting ideas and solutions have been discussed here, but I just wanted to point out that the people we're talking about, they are not employees in most cases. So a lot of the solutions that we're trying to deliver, we need to understand that the regions that we're talking about, they lack resources in general. There are no healthcare facilities to even talk about. So there are no local healthcare workers to even start with that can go and, you know, help people. And because in certain places this is even illegal and people are doing it on their own, no one is going to take responsibility for them. So although we, as scientists, we are discussing these solutions and they work very well as textbook solutions, these are very difficult to implement just because when we, you know, take into, when we consider policy and, you know, how the government is involved and how other local people are involved. So I think while we are discussing the solutions, let's also assess like how practical they are and then structure the solution accordingly.
Yeah, and you know, I think that's exactly why I chose a hard problem to even talk about today. This is a little bit of a mock session for when you guys will be building teams and you will be discussing sets of ideas. You really want to make sure that all of these voices are on the back of your head at the same time. While we are imagining lots of possibilities, you're also being, connecting with this reality check associated that most of these things would not exist if we were not talking about an absolutely resource constrained place. And simultaneously, there's very few sets of entities to even engage with on the implementation side. I think on the Mica front, I do know there are certain sets of NGOs that have galvanized for the last 4 or 5 years because this has become more and more of a visible area. Lots of large-scale NGOs. So, for example, USAID just gave out a $5 million grant for problems and solutions in the Mica, and especially in the context of both Madagascar and India. So, clearly over time, things are starting to change. So, but again, very well said. It's and again, this is exactly the point of this discussion: is how do you think about a multi-pronged problem while keeping in mind, and then in the next class or next to next class, next Tuesday, we will talk about a framework where we will break this problem down into little pieces to just make sure that we have a more formal framework to talk about it. I think today I want to do this much more as a brainstorming so people have a sense of how do you keep many conflicting ideas in your head at the same time. Okay, so next we have Dia and then Kavya.
Yeah, I think even my point is in tandem with healthcare. And in the Jharkhand video, what struck me the most was that they didn't know what they were mining. They didn't know what it was being used for. And I'm pretty sure they obviously weren't educated on the sort of health impacts it could have on them and their children. And if they were pregnant, it would sort of carry on further in generations. And these impacts may not be studied and researched either. So I think educating the miners is also a very important thing that should be done. But again, as Sanjana also mentioned, there's no sort of regulating body that is there employing these people or sort of giving them any sort of rights or anything like that. So it would be an issue again, who is going to educate them, who is going to give them the basic sort of personal protective equipment that they would need. So those are a few points that came to my head.
Yeah, and again, I think the idea around structure and organizations, there's always a case when communities are not organized, and then at some point of time, they become organized. So the lack of these sets of organizations not existing is actually also an opportunity in some sense. And it has happened in many industries in the past where people do form an organizational structure around this. And again, I think right now, everything that I've seen has been really the legal rights and the lawyers and many NGOs that are primarily working on child labor, because child labor laws are incredibly strict in India and many other places. And effectively, that's been the approach, and maybe that's not the right set of an approach. But lack of an organization is also possibly an opportunity in some sense. And, you might put all your energy just in building that organizational structure around. Okay, 2 last comments, and then I want to jump to share just something from the Amazon. So Kavya and then Hari Krishna. Go ahead.
Yeah, something that I think Manan said in the chat was that he thinks this is about exploitation, and I agree. This is exploitation happening at the national level and the individual scale. So we have multinational corporations or corporations from other hegemonic countries coming in and extracting resources that are endemic to that place. And then we also have, even for industries that are, self-contained, like within the country, exploitation is still possible because of capitalistic incentives, right? So at the multinational level, we look to international law to regulate these industries, right? And as we can see in current events, like international law is not necessarily the most binding force, especially with these extremely powerful entities and powerful countries.
Yeah.
And then at the national scale, we have industries, I'll look to like the textile industry in India,
Mhm.
where workers are very exploited and the textiles are, sold to other Indians within the country. And when these workers have tried to organize against their exploiters who are, higher up in the chain, um, the risks are very dire. Like it's
Mhm.
life or death to organize, to unionize, and to demand better conditions.
Mhm.
As that one woman said in Jharkhand, like, I'm poor, like I have no choice. Like there doesn't seem to be another option, and asking people who are in such a position to unionize is a lot to ask. But I will
Mhm.
say that for these multinational corporations, there is a chance that people who are in these countries where unionizing is not as dangerous, for instance, like a car company in the US who's using Mica, where down the supply chain it is extremely risky for child laborers or forced laborers, they could be unionizing here and demanding better conditions all the way down the supply chain.
Mhm.
A lot of people think that unionizing in certain sectors in the US, especially the tech sector, is not useful because tech workers here might be paid decently. But you can unionize and unionize around demands
Mhm.
for people in other parts of the supply chain and
Mhm.
apply pressure this way. And so that's just one area to apply
Yeah,
pressure.
no, that's a fantastic point. And actually, one of the things, it's a 40-minute documentary, and I'll send that out. And when you watch it, what's quite beautiful about the documentary is that that person traces back all the major corporations that use exactly that mica. And he identifies and confronts the large organizations. And, one of them happens to be Merck. He literally traces back Mica from those individuals that you saw the video to Merck products, and goes through the whole legal context of what their responses are. And I mean, it's a fantastic documentary. Everybody should watch it. You'll kind of get this sense of that, the top down pressure. And then once this was brought in almost 5 years ago, when it was identified first, there's a lot of corporate language around it, but also on the other hand, some people did organize their supply chains differently, and that moved the demand from some of the places where exploitative practices were in place. And then I think, there is a circle of change because of no alternative uh, financial means available, that also, in some sense, once the demand moves away, there is this tricky scenario of thinking about what the alternative financial means actually are. So fabulous documentary, and it really touches on a lot of points that you mentioned, Kavya. Okay, just last comment, and then let's talk a little bit about gold mining briefly. Oh, go ahead, Hari Krishna.
Yeah, so I think my idea mainly focuses on the health perspective, and from the health side of view, I think that in this area, the environment setting, like the dust is everywhere, the scorching sun, all of that. So for this mainly compromises the health of the workers, and it's kind of income for them, so they can't stop doing this. So what we can do is use some political support, and we can use some technology to mine some large chunks of this mica, and then put up a setting where there are humidifiers and where manual work can be done. So we can draw some kind of line between what manual work is required and what technological work can be done, and then the manual work can be done in a better setting with humidifiers to settle all the mica dust and all of that. And also, like, we can help the workers to build upon what we say, like, high value products of mica, so they can increase the understanding of that in that area, rather than focusing on this just small area, and then they will add up to the economy and all of that.
Yeah, so just two comments which are really interesting in terms of there is an entire this small scale versus large scale mining and the capital cost around. And actually, this is something that I learned more recently on the gold mining front, is that every time a capital equipment is added to a process that protects, like even something like a good mask, it actually curtails from exactly the groups that we're talking about, because the resources added eventually are a capital investment that is not made in any of these sets of industries to begin with. And then the high value product is a really interesting thread to think about. Just, there have been technologies that have existed of converting small mica flakes into larger composites that have much, much higher value. But then the person that controls the IP around taking a low-grade process mica into a high-grade process mica, that happens somewhere else. Most of the time, it's just shipped. I mean, this is the same story of, many products that are made, the value chain is essentially not distributed and it's shifted, which, again, as you all think about sets of problems and think about manufacturing, I think this distributed versus centralized manufacturing approaches will play a huge role. This is also true for medical devices. If you can make as much locally, you do really add value. So the purpose of this exercise, we will have a Mica team. But I wanted this to do collectively with just one single goal in mind, which is I just want you to appreciate how complex sometimes any given problem that you might get started and thinking about. And to me, when I first think about something, almost a paralysis sets in, because any step I might think about feels like, oh, it could be wrong, any step. And I wanted to just genuinely share that feeling with you all. Sometimes just even the idea that the populations are incredibly vulnerable, our understanding is, again, not deep enough, because, you might set some interviews, you could get started, you could think. This is something that consumes you as a problem. And I think it's okay to be in this feeling. As you are thinking about sets of problems, it's okay to be indecisive. And I think this is the whole point of why the purpose of this class is to work in teams with different perspectives. And I think this is also why it's important to maintain that "and" culture, because people will challenge our opinions should be challenged. And this is why it's also difficult. And at that same time, making sure that the teams that you guys are all building have the breadth of experience. So if all the engineers just made a team together, or all the lawyers made a team together, they would really come up with a completely different set of an approach. So the purpose of this was kind of a demonstration, while saying very clearly this would be one of the problems that I would love for one of the teams to pick up this year. And, there's lots to talk about and think about what can be done in small scale mining. What is the future of small scale mining, for example, 10 years from now? If you had the time, what are the similarities between the conditions that we saw in mica? Now we will switch to gold for a minute. And suddenly you start seeing patterns that are similar. And so we're going to spend 2 minutes just watching a 2-minute documentary on gold mining. I know there are a few students from Peru, so I would love for them to actually just share their own personal experiences. I'll talk briefly about the people that I met, but let's just take a minute. And again, the biological implications of all of this, the human kind of a cost associated with it, and then with the Peruvian context, there is a massive ecological implication, because now they're starting to see mercury leach into the Amazon, and that has kind of a third axis, which we haven't seen so far. So let's just take a minute, see the, and then Hope, if you have the link to the
Amazon. Our report is part of a collaboration with the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. It comes from special correspondent Steve Sapienza in Peru.
These miners in Peru are part of the biggest gold rush the world has ever seen. Recent spikes in gold prices have lured 10 to 15 million people worldwide into the business of small-scale gold mining. But rising global demand for gold has also fueled demand for a far less prized metal, mercury. The toxic metal is used by millions of miners every day to separate and collect gold from rocks and soil. Miners say mercury is easy to use, readily available, and cheap. The United Nations Environment Program estimates that small-scale miners use up to 1,350 tons of mercury each year, making it the single largest use of mercury worldwide. In southeastern Peru, the gold rush has attracted some 20,000 small-scale miners to the pristine rainforest and rivers of the Madre de Dios region. The devastation caused by widespread mining is easy to spot, with huge swaths of the forest turned to barren desert. But the damage caused by the heavy use of mercury is harder to detect. Mercury from small-scale mines travels widely, settling in sediments and moving up the food chain into fish, fish-eating wildlife, and humans. Scientists and medical researchers only recently started to measure the impact of mercury here.
This fish is called mota. This is a very popular fish around the region. You'll find it on a lot of dinner tables, a lot of restaurant menus. This fish is at the top of its food chain. And what that means is it consumes a lot of smaller fish. And a lot of these small fish have mercury in them. And through a process known as biomagnification, this fish accumulates a lot of mercury. In fact, if a person consumes 2 servings of this fish per week, they're getting 7.5 times the safe limit of mercury, according to the World Health Organization.
It takes 2 ounces of mercury to produce a single ounce of gold. That means 50 tons of mercury are used to extract the 25 metric tons of gold mined here each year. Miners mix the soil with mercury, often using their hands and feet, creating a clump of amalgam that contains gold. And yet most miners are unaware of the danger posed by mercury to the environment and to their health.
There are very few studies about the contamination of people due to mercury.
Biologist Cesar Ascora has closely monitored the dramatic increase of mercury use in the Madre de Dios region.
We recently finished one study made on a sample of 30 people in one mining area, and they were all contaminated with mercury above allowable levels. The people that have the worst levels of contamination are those who are not miners, those not linked to the activity itself. They are the merchants, family members, the people who live near the shops where the gold and mercury is sold.
Gold shops use stoves to heat the miners' clumps of mercury gold amalgam, releasing the vapors into the shop, and then outside, further spreading the toxic threat to towns across the region. Epidemiologist Dr. Manrique Arada Estrada has worked in Madre de Dios for 20 years collecting data on diseases and health risks like mercury poisoning.
We have been able to find cases of acute intoxication. People arrive with abdominal pain, they arrive with a metallic taste in their mouths, or headaches, and all of this is related to the handling of mercury. But we have not been able to find patients with chronic intoxication because we do not have the equipment to make that type of diagnosis.
Dr. Arada thinks small-scale miners need more education on the dangers of mercury and also alternatives to its use.
There is good mining carried out in a clean way, finding acceptable methods for obtaining gold without the use of mercury, for example. That would be a good alternative to avoid all this contamination.
With well over 3,000 mining operations to monitor, the unbridled gold rush is overwhelming Ernesto Montanos and his tiny staff at the region's Mineral and Gas Ministry.
I currently have over 500 environmental impact studies to evaluate, but I only have 2 professionals, 2 people who do evaluations.
In Peru, small-scale mining is often the only means of survival for people in poor rural communities. Past government efforts to rein in illegal and destructive gold mining have often resulted in civil unrest and deadly clashes with miners. While Montanos acknowledges the government must do more to stem the flow of mercury and enforce environmental laws, he also thinks consumers can help change the way gold is mined.
All the countries that are consumers of gold, recipients of gold, what they have to demand is to buy green gold, ecologic gold, gold that adheres to all quality standards, to the point where there is no excuse to buy illegal minerals.
Last year, when the government imposed tough new environmental laws on small-scale miners in Madre de Dios, tens of thousands of miners across Peru launched protests.
I'm in Chala, a small fishing and mining town on Peru's southern coast. Last year, 6 people died on this highway
when police tried to remove a roadblock set by small-scale miners who were protesting government plans to impose stricter environmental controls on them. But in a nearby mining area known as Relave, a small-scale mining company is changing its practices and going green. The Arelsa Mining Cooperative is a 2-hour drive up desolate canyons from the coast. In the wake of the protest violence in Chala, the government singled out Arelsa as an example of best practices in small-scale mining. Founded by mine workers in 1997, Arelsa is part of a growing trend of South American small-scale mines seeking to produce gold with less impact on the environment and more benefit to the miners.
Well, with informal mining, the difference is that more is sacrifice, more is risked. There are days when you get money, there are days when you do not get paid. But here in Arelsa, it is a business with a secure paycheck.
While area miners still rely heavily on crude tools and mercury to extract gold, Arelsa miners have moved to a safer option. Using a method recently approved by Peru's Environmental Health Board, Arelsa miners use cyanide leaching as an alternative to mercury processing.
Cyanide can contaminate if it is dumped to a water source. If there was a river nearby, then it is completely poisonous. But if we see the cyanide is recycled back into the process, then there is no contamination.
General Manager Danielle Enrique Valverde hopes Arelsa will soon become Fair Trade and Fair Mine certified. For consumers, this means gold is extracted in a way that limits pollution of harmful chemicals like mercury and cyanide. For miners, it means better income, job security, and 10% of profits set aside for the community.
There is a percentage of that which goes directly for projects in the community, the local population. We are already seeing projects such as recycling, forestry, that are not just at our company, but projects for the schools and the municipality.
Fair Trade and Fair Mine certified gold.
So I'm going to stop that there. I just wanted to make sure we got to the point where you also saw the alternative in the small scale. So I think, I mean, the message really is around, you can see the similarities. You can also see where both scientific knowledge and scientific tools do have a role to play in these problems. You know, clearly there is a very large number of class of small scale mining techniques that have been out there for hundreds of years, if not more. There is a massive need in terms of, for example, thinking about measuring mercury in our environment, because effectively, sometimes those documentation is what essentially allows to be able to build a policy around it. If a risky mining strategy is actually taken and there is no environmental sampling, then you end up being in this situation that you don't really know what its impact will be on a longer period of time. I think in the Amazon, there's a other class of groups that have been documenting and just seeing what the level of rising mercury in the river itself is, not just from a human perspective, but just the wildlife perspective itself. So there is a lot more number of studies that are just starting. And I think, you know, one important sort of a space to think a little bit about in all of this is as you're trying to think about a class of problems, they both have a very deep human dimension that is hard to strip away. And I think when I was thinking about which one would be the first set of problems that I want to introduce in this space, it's the human dimension is very visceral, it's very clear. Much of this activity is illegal, so you can't just say, oh, wait a second, the government, in some sense, declaring something illegal just washes the hands from, you can't blame the government in a way. There is a massive, because it's illegal, you know, there's a massive issue around many environmentalists put their life on the danger when they do actually report many of the things in the Amazon to begin with. So there is there's a huge social and exploitation associated really around even the lives of people that report many of these sets of threads. And I think one thread that we'll try to do is, as most of you are doing the by the numbers assignment, try picking a challenging problem. Try picking a problem that you might not initially feel that you can use numbers to estimate and think about its impact. And, try picking things that have social dimension. Try picking things that you might want to quantify, associated with, initially a problem that you felt not much has been said and done on the quantitative side itself. So I think when you will all watch the by the numbers video that we will post or is already posted, and for the folks that are already doing that assignment, try picking a challenging problem, because I think this is at the heart of the class. Is, of course, we will spend a lot of time working and choosing problems that are well defined. I work on malaria. I know the number of people. I kind of feel I know sometimes what needs to be done, because it's a problem that we've been working for 10 years. It's a problem that many people have been working for decades. But then very recently, I visited a malaria clinic, which was in a Naxalite area, which was politically, essentially not controlled by the government. And it completely changed my mind for what the malaria problem is when you kind of put a constraint. And so I think any set of a problem that you choose to work on the by the numbers side, try to think about, and even as an exercise, pick up certain sets of problems that have this social or a human dimension that are harder. Yeah, I think the message for today is really that many of these things will feel perplexing, and it's okay. For the whole class, you will always be in this situation where it feels like I'm not really sure what we should do, but you should still think about it. I'm going to open the class to just more general discussion. Anybody has thought about more on the gold side, mercury contamination, any comments associated with environmental monitoring? This would be the time to bring that up. Paloma, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, well, I'm from
Can you
Peru.
also introduce yourself? Yes.
Sure.
We will
I'm
do
a
this as a
physician.
practice. Whenever anybody speaks in the class, just for the first couple of weeks, please introduce yourself, because not all of you were there for the international cohort. Yeah.
So hi everyone, I'm Paloma. I'm a physician from Peru. I'm currently in New Haven, but I've some experience working both as a clinician and as a researcher in the Amazon. And yeah, well, I think this documentary does a good job of explaining sort of the mercury side of the illegal mining issue, but there's so much more on the social aspect that it doesn't even start to go into. There's concerns that a lot of the terrorism activities that we still have in the Amazon are sort of funded by these illegal mining activities. We know that a lot of human trafficking and sex work and like human exploitation in general are also linked to this. And this all sort of stems from the fact that it really is an activity that is not regulated. But it's hard to crack down on it because a lot of people's livelihoods depend on it. Another huge issue, I think, that is not talked about a lot is the fact that a lot of these like environmental issues and environmental exploitation issues are also seen in like big mineries in other areas of the country that are actually illegal, and they're also contaminating, and there's also a lot of mercury pollution and health related issues, but there's no outrage because they're legal, because they're funded by big corporations. And so I think a lot of the outrage from some of the small miners stems sort of from that, from the fact that, these big corporations are doing the exact same thing or worse. And the local people aren't even gaining money from that, and yet the government is not doing anything about it. So it's a very, very big, complicated issue that requires more than just, thinking about it in terms of the environment.
Yeah, no, I think thank you for bringing this up. It's the thread around the cartels and many of people's who have spoken against many places and their lives being there is a lot more going on the human dimension. And I think the point that you bring about that even legal and other small scale sets of entities where the practices are still very crude. And I think I remember in Senegal, I was in one of the rainforest and we accidentally walked into an illegal gold mining operation, just open mercury pits everywhere. And we were there for malaria. And it turns out people live in the forest there because there's gold, but you live in the forest in the middle of nowhere. There's a massive amount of malaria. It had the largest malaria hotspot that we had seen. And then on the other hand, there were also several other very large corporations, an Australian organization, a Chinese company. They all have their other interests too. And they have certified processes that they bring to the table, but then they own everything. So it's not so easy to be thinking about what the right sets of approaches should actually be. And again, I think this is exactly why the social and the human dimension you brought up is exactly why I wanted to open the class with a topic that is difficult to be thinking about. And again, of course, in the class, we will think quite a lot about technical approaches to explore these topics, but without the social context, none of them mean anything in some sense. Okay, so I have a few more hands up. Pankaj, I know you've been waiting. And then just as an exercise, if you could just introduce yourself. Oh, Pankaj, I think you are muted.
Yeah, I study obesity and aging, and I, like Manu, was also brought up in India. And I also got a part of me that is very interested in solving, sort of helping solve problems like education for underprivileged kids, and I volunteer for an organization like that. And I wanted to, this has been really amazing to listen to. Both the problems sounded unsurmountable before the discussion started, and I'm really grateful to hear all the really interesting comments. And as you pointed out, to talk about something impossible with gold, the first thing that comes to mind is like, this is like a useless or very not that useful a material. Why do we value it so much? So I just wanted to put it out as a problem. We have decided to give this so much value. And I don't know if it'll solve the problem, but how can we, are there ways to tackle that issue? How, and this is something also, was very interesting to learn from when I read Sapiens. We decide currency, we decide these things, and now they become, they carry the own problems. Yeah. So I just want to put it out as a
the fact that the word standard has the word gold in it is yeah. Go ahead. I see Pranayas and then Vani. Oh, and then Lucas. Go ahead, Pranaya.
Yeah. Hi, this is Pranaya Joshi from Pune, India. And I was thinking the human angle that we can give to the mercury problem would be probably we can kind of emotionally take up the charge by telling these people that the heavy metals can also be transported to babies via mother's milk. So if we can give this kind of an emotional angle, many a times when the child's health is involved, people tend to get emotionally attached to that problem and probably might think about it a second time before taking such drastic kind of working methods that they are using presently. So
yeah, no, I think one of the threads on this goes back to education itself also, and education not just in the context of all aspects of a problem being communicated in a clear way. So I do know actually for Jharkhand, for example, there is an NGO that primarily focuses on just making sure that both the pregnant mothers and younger kids are not exposed, primarily on a health side. And they go in that 40-minute documentary you'll watch, they go to the same family every week, just trying to use different sets of arguments to convince them not to go to the mining area again. And again, because of that financial context, it's not so easy. But it's a beautiful conversation. And at some point of time in that documentary, the mother breaks down. And again, she brought up exactly the point that you brought up. So watch the documentary. I'm seeing a few more hands up. I know Lucas hasn't had a chance. Go ahead, Lucas.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lucas. Part of the Stanford cohort. And yeah, I guess just one thing that I was thinking about when I was watching that was how like when there's like the informal mining practices, like the actual miners kind of have like 100% of the power over their job, and like when they're working and they get 100% of the profits of like what they're making, versus when you like organize it into a company, there's always that risk of like the power being concentrated at the top and workers' rights like being sacrificed for, like people who are organizing who like and their greed coming into play. And so, yeah, I mean, there was the perspective of that worker, like who preferred the like consistent paychecks, at that company. But like some people might say like might make more money if they were working like for themselves, basically. And so that's definitely like a question that I'm like interested in quantifying. But I just think that there's like a really interesting like kind of tension there between like the risks of like large corporations and organizing labor versus like having a distributed labor system.
Yeah,
And
so
I think
Lucas,
like, yeah.
very interesting point. And actually, I was confused about this, and I then spoke to some of the people whose families have been in the gold mining. And what emerged is almost to a point that all of these small scale entities, there is still a power distribution, and still the money actually doesn't make it to the individuals that are risking their lives. And in some sense, it borderlines to a point of where some of the people felt they don't even have the choice, that they can't even leave. And so there is, I'm not saying all, but in certain sets of scenarios, there is this situation where neither do the people make any profits at all, and nor do they have protection from the classic labor laws and other scenarios. And that came as a shocking because, early on, California is built on the gold rush, and you think, oh, pioneers came in and did the adventure and explore, but then they made profits. Turns out it was only the people who had the capital who put their money, and then the actual individuals still get nothing in some sense. And so I think it's there might be other industries and things out there. And actually, I'm not bringing this up, but another topic that we will talk about, which a friend of mine has been working quite a lot on, is slave labor in practices in the ocean. Because when people go on a boat, once you're on a boat, you're in this very dangerous environment, and you basically do as you're told. And there are lots of exploitative practices in this informal and illegal fishing industry that also mirror the same way, where once people don't have a choice, but once you are engaged in that process, very little rights exist. Although these are very, very small operations, for example, that will be working at sea. Okay, I think we're almost out of time. Maybe I'll just see folks who have I see Manan, Manya, and Laith. And then I want to turn it into more of an open mic, so people who might have to leave then can leave. Go ahead. Who did I say first? Was that Manya and then Manan?
Hi, I think it'd also be helpful to try and improve quality of life away from the occupation itself.
for the miners and the mining families. For example, with the mica mining, groundwater could be prominently contaminated nearby. And while we work on changing this mining culture itself, implementing safety solutions for the family and improving the quality of life in that situation also helps, even though it doesn't directly link to the mining issue, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think a fantastic point. And in the documentary, again, you'll see, uh, you know, Jharkhand is in a place where it's by all index of development, very little development in the region to begin with. And that is part of the problem. Okay, I see Manan and then Late.
Hello, Professor. I'm Manan. I'm first year student of physics in India. So I think what we're really missing here is the point that mercury poisoning is the real issue, rather than gold mining in itself. As gold mining serves as a form of wage earning, it's a form of livelihood for a lot of people in Peru. So I think the most viable solution that occurred to me was the government limiting the supply of mercury rather than imposing a ban on it. As we saw that when the government tried to impose restrictions on gold mining, there erupted large protests. But if the government limits the supply of mercury in itself, or controls its price volatility, then I think the miners will certainly find a way around it, to either reduce the use of mercury or switch to more viable alternatives. But I also think that, as mentioned in the video, the company, I forgot the name really, but giving a company monopoly over the industry is not a good idea, because once a company achieves the monopoly, no matter how they preach their morals, they ultimately look out for their profit. And once the monopoly is achieved, there is no guarantee as to whether they would really keep up with what they've promised and not revert to using mercury, which is much cheaper and
Yes.
results in much more
So
profits.
Manan, most of these processes, the use of mercury in gold, use of cyanide, the chemistry of this got figured out almost 100 years ago. This is actually a very interesting thread. So anybody can do it. It's just the fact that a small amount of capital and increasing capital is needed, and thinking a lot more about, the entity that's working, they have a unique challenge that cyanide is also incredibly toxic. And so they are operating in a region that doesn't cause the leaching per se. But I think the idea of control mercury, that's an interesting one. I have to think more about it. Yeah, it's okay. So I think I see Laith and then Rafia's hands are up. Go ahead, Laith.
Yeah, hi everyone, my name is
If you
Lip.
could just introduce yourself also.
Yeah, I'm part of the Stanford cohort. This doesn't really solve the root problem. I think that a lot of people are trying to address. This is kind of more so for the kind of just maybe trying to find a solution for some of the effects. But we were talking a lot about like legalization and it being illegal and how because of it being illegal, like there's no way of supporting them. I know there are some legal operations we said that are still kind of exploiting the workers and causing these health problems, but I was wondering because I remember I did a debate back in high school, and there was like a point of contention in the US with the policy of like not legalizing illegal drug use, but like decriminalizing it. And so I was wondering if that was ever a discussion. I know it's different countries, so the infrastructure may be a lot different, but if you decriminalize it, it may be something where if one worker gets exploited, obviously if it's illegal, there's no entity, no government that they can turn to protect them because of the fact that it's illegal. But if you decriminalize it, is it possible to kind of then get someone who can kind of protect them or work with them? Or like potentially if it's a health ramification, they may be more inclined to go seek healthcare than if they were engaging in something that was illegal.
Yeah. Fantastic point. And actually, what's so fascinating is that this whole Mica illegal regions have only been declared recently when the reports of child labor were brought in. And that by itself could have been an issue. One thing you could have done as an entity is to enable more support. But this whole idea of making it illegal, and especially on the Mica front, the Amazon, that region is protected. And that's fascinating because it's actually quite recent. it was not illegal. And so many people who have been mining in that area for generations, that's all they have known. And it's interesting that very suddenly it did transition to becoming illegal. Okay, I think Rafia, and then I want to turn into kind of the closure for today's. Go ahead, Rafia.
Oh, I think I have started to see a pattern in this case, and I just remember one thing back in my power plant class when my teacher was uh, teaching us about the nuclear engineering and the effect of uranium mining and its environmental effect. And I just went through the slide right now of my teacher and just found out that it's pretty much the same. It's pretty much the same cycle over and over again. And it just clicked on my mind that between this policy debate and technology, what we are really missing is that I mean, particularly in the case of the gold mining, I have seen two different cases. One is a messy process that introduces mercury in this, and another is that the well-organized process. So why would someone choose the well-organized process? I think it is if the industry itself is getting some economic advantage from the waste management part. So in the case of like the gold mining process that we saw where people are recycling cyanides from the leaches, they are getting some kind of economic advantage to the industry that are leveraging this industry to take up such like environment friendly solution. So and if I just connect a personal experience of mine, I currently live in Dhaka city, the capital of Bangladesh, and just right in the middle of Dhaka city there is a tobacco industry. The most interesting thing, that is the British American tobacco. And like, you know what, the tobacco industry has this dust issues and all this stuff. And government just recently like giving them some kind of incentives. And they have just recently deployed a dust collector and a new effluent treatment plant so that they can recycle this tobacco droplets or the tobacco particles and then reuse it in their industrial process. And this kind of waste management is giving them a kind of economic advantage. And that is why they're trying to introduce a cleaner and environmental friendly technology. So as long as we can't convince these people who are living in the top part of the supply chain, like the industrial stakeholders and the policymakers out there, that how we can economically help them, and then at the same time getting the social advantage that we as human-centric engineers want. So I guess we should like focus on the economic advantage of the waste management part as well for the industries.
No, I think excellent point. And again, this is also the spirit of frugal science, that you're trying to do more with less. The idea of capturing mercury back again, or a completely new process that, and again, for a lot of sustainable manufacturing practices, this has turned out to be true, that you can get environmental and financial benefits. So I have a friend, for example, and I'll close it on this point, but it's kind of a fun one to think about. Many of you might not realize there is actually gold in our pee. There are many minerals that our body kind of accounts for, and you can think about sanitation plants in all cities. Sanitation is a huge issue. Human waste has to be processed, but there are remarkable, if processes can be developed, and this is what a lot of people have been working on and have been able to show, that human waste can be completely converted into something that has financial value, and it goes back into improving the human waste management system, which every city needs no matter what. So ending with that on the gold side of the story, I think, yeah, it is very valuable to think about that these processes should be, if they do have financial benefits, then they fit in this framework, that they become self-replicating. Then you don't need to convince anybody. messy problem that I don't have very strong opinions about, but I'm actively thinking about. The next week's assignment, and for the global cohort, please watch the By the Numbers lecture, which is about putting quantitative numbers to your ideas. You can choose any problem, and then the assignment is on the Discord, which is you are supposed to put together calculation that essentially quantify problems that you're excited about. So just if I show Discord for 1 second, right somewhere here, you can see this is the introduce yourself. And I thought that we had, oh, right here, by the numbers. This is the 2024 coursework. And people are starting to discuss a little bit of the problem. So please post problems that you are working on here, even if you haven't begun. This is also true for the global cohort, because it would be very valuable for others to give you comments. So if you've chosen a problem, post that here. And this is something that I would like everybody to do in as individuals, not as teams. You're allowed to talk to everybody, but numbers is something that you should just calculate by yourself. I think I'm already out of time. We are going to catch up on Thursday. Thanks again for connecting. I know some people have mentioned the timing issue. I know it's pretty late probably in India right now. I'm going to talk to the Stanford cohort, see whether we can juggle around the time a little bit, make it a little early for you guys, not so late for other folks, but I can't guarantee anything. We're going to try certain sets of things. And I know the number of people in the class will settle down at some point of time. So often enough when we start, there are fluctuations, but the folks that know and want to be here will be here. So I'm delighted that many of you are able to connect, although it's very late in different parts of the world. Okay, I think we're going to say bye. We will connect on Thursday, same time. I'll be on campus, so we will have our Stanford cohort class in person at the teaching center. And then everybody else, whosoever can connect by Zoom. And then for next Thursday, we have Benedict joining from Germany, and we will do a technical session on optics and frugal optics. So lots to cover there. Bye, everyone.